All right, guys, here's a quick breakdown of how Wyckoff works, the macro and micro structures. Essentially, what you have is you'll have these large, maybe month-long distributions like this or accumulations, and you'll have a bunch of little mini structures within it, right? Because Wyckoff works in every single time frame. You'll start seeing it on 15-minute, hour. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? We have that video, the 2-year long Wyckoff distribution. Right, these are just patterns that tend to keep forming. So let's look at some microstructures and how you can use them to gauge points of interest in the macro structure. Right, so if you have the selling climax, let's say you have the AR here, maybe a secondary test, right, up thrust. This up thrust could be a little distribution, and you know when it's forming that it might be the end of the up thrust. So these things do form around large volume areas or resistances and things like that. But let's look at some of these, right? So you have the current one that's building, right? We talked about this in the video that I think is going to be released before this, the redistribution video. And, you'll have this redistribution, but potentially it could be a large accumulation, like which happened earlier this year, right? So distribution and then a large accumulation. We don't know what's going to happen there yet. Still forming. I think it doesn't really matter. It could be both. We'll see about that later. We have the tiny little distribution here. If you zoom in here, you'll see another distribution. We'll zoom in to find out. Let's go on the hourly. I just wanted to show you in general. It's kind of hard to navigate the charts when you're on the hourly. So here's an example where you have an accumulation, and this would actually be like this, the distribution, right? It should actually encompass this whole thing, but it looks cleaner this way. And if you zoom in, you can tell where each individual points are, right? Here at the tip, we have a little downward action, then boom, breaks out, takes out all this redistribution. A lot of this is noise, by the way, as well. Not everything can be classified by any measure. A lot of it is just random noise, and it gets distorted when you're dealing with Ethereum, which has underlying strength currently relative to Bitcoin. Bitcoin has cleaner schematics and distributions, right? You have a little small accumulation here, right? But overall, this is a distribution structure. It's not a very clean one, right? It actually just lost. It didn't even have its third bounce to here or higher because there's such selling pressure in general. So that's a way that schematics can be distorted and they won't end up looking perfectly. You have like a reaccumulation here, right? 3 strikes down. You'll have a distribution, and this potentially could have been another distribution, but it ended up going up. So you have this large accumulation earlier in the year, right? Well, what do you have here? Half of it is a giant redistribution. Up here, I haven't checked, but you can probably find a nice distribution pattern. Right here is a very nice distribution, right? You can draw the range sort of like this. Up here, if you go a little bit further in this major cascade that occurred, you have a nice distribution here. This little breakdown of price right here, right? The downward action, the trading range is something like this, right? Downward price action, breaks up, starts cascading down. A little bounce, but it continues down. The bounds of this is usually around volume areas and points of interest, just as a reminder. You'll have a nice little accumulation down here, right? You'll probably have a nice distribution up here somewhere. Here you go, a nice distribution here. If you zoom in, you can see it, a nice, not so nice, but it is an accumulation, right? It's a nice band. It's actually almost perfect. Here you'll have another larger accumulation. That was after that push from 20,000, right? The same idea stands really for Ethereum. We can check the Ethereum on the daily. Let's do that. So you'll have the large accumulation here. I haven't checked whether there are any distributions here or not. Ethereum is not the greatest because it had a lot of underlying strength, so they they don't look very well, but when a schematic breaks on Bitcoin, it'll break here as well, right? Here we have a nice accumulation, right? We'll have one sort of like this. It's not picture perfect by any measure, but it does exist there. Up here at the highs, the previous highs earlier in the year, right? We'll have this nice accumulation here. You have the three sort of strikes. You can create the trading range. I'm being very vague right now because I'm just trying to show you the actual idea, right? You have a distribution here, right? So they mark the tops, the distributions of certain moves. So you can have a macro move like this entire distribution, this big one, and within it you'll find a bunch of little smaller structures. And I mean, you can go down to the lowest time frames, the highest time frames. They occur temporally throughout the whole thing, right? You can find them literally anywhere. And they're very useful to know because you can mark the top. If you're following this and you're like, after the up thrust, it goes back into the trading range, right? You're looking at this and you're like, it's going back up, and you're trying to figure out, like, is this going to go higher or is it going to bounce from the trading range? Well, if you see this building, it adds confluence to all your other indicators to show you that that might be it and it might be going down. So that's the basic idea of the macro / micro structures and how they work. You're going to start seeing them everywhere. We'll continue adding more Wyckoff videos to help you explain in real time how these things work. Thanks for watching.